The F-5E Tiger II was developed as a follow-on to the earlier F-5 and flies for the American tech tree in War Thunder. Let's check it out. By the late 1960s, the capabilities of the F-5 Freedom Fighter had started to be eclipsed by other aircraft, and the US wanted a replacement for the earlier versions to offer as something for export customers. They accepted bids under the International Fighter Aircraft Competition and accepted proposals from several companies, but decided early on to proceed with the Northrop F-5E. The aircraft was based on the earlier F-5 Freedom Fighter, but was larger, had different internal structures, leading-edge root extensions, more powerful engines, and completely new avionics and a heavily upgraded weapon system. It also included a radar set, which was only available as an optional upgrade on the original F-5. Despite the visual similarities, it was, in all regards, an entirely new design. And while it retained the F-5 designation under the U.S. Department of Defense system, it was renamed from Freedom Fighter to the Tiger II. The F-5E was an instant success, and started rolling off the production line in quantity starting in 1973. In American service, the F-5E was primarily used as an aggressor opponent in dissimilar air combat training. In foreign service, the F-5E would go on to be adopted by dozens of countries in a variety of combat roles, most using it as a clear day fighter. Eventually, the F-5E would see combat all over the world, including extensive operations during the Iran-Iraq War, the Ogden War, the Vietnam War, the Civil War in Yemen, and the First Gulf War. Over its lifespan, the F-5E has been continually upgraded with variants and subvariants, getting uprated engines, better weapons and radar systems, and it remains in service with over a dozen countries. Interestingly, the F-5E was tested by the Soviet Union in the late 1970s, and in Iran, they've developed it into several newer fighters whose names I just can't pronounce, sorry. The highest scoring ace in the F-5E was Ethiopian pilot Legisi Tefera, who shot down between 5 and 7 enemy aircraft and was eventually promoted to general and became a national hero for the people of Ethiopia. In War Thunder, the F-5E is a rank 7 fighter at battle rating 11, very much part of the top tier. The plane's weapon system includes the AN/APQ-159 radar set. In real life, this was a planar phased array radar set, which could detect targets a bit past 35 kilometers in good weather, and it was basically intended purely for air interceptions. Now in the game, it gets a very basic set of features. It has 4 range presets, only a fixed dish angle, and the ACM boresight mode, which is always a good thing to have. In practice, though, against fighter-sized targets, it can really only detect things out to about 20 kilometers or so, and lock things up at about half that distance. Really, for a top-tier jet, this is a very basic radar set. The F-5E has no ballistics computer for any of its air-to-ground weapons. Now, despite the lack of a ballistics computer, the plane gets an enormous selection of weapon loadouts. You get almost every possible combination of tip-winders, bombs, rocket pods, and air-to-ground missiles. Now, in a recent patch, the loadouts were changed a bit, and the new entry-level missile for the F-5E is the AIM-9E. I'm not a fan of this particular missile, but it's the entry-level option, and it'll help you grind some upgrades. Now, the second missile you get is the AIM-9J. This is a 20G missile with decent range and 40 seconds of seeker time. While it isn't the best dogfight missile at the top tiers, it's far from bad, and if you're careful about your launch angles, you can get hits with this without a whole lot of trouble. Now for air-to-ground missiles, you get the AGM-65B. This is a version of the TV-guided Maverick missile, and has some quirks. The F-5E's weapon system makes getting target locks in the external view much more difficult, and unlike some other air-to-ground missiles, it's almost impossible to use this effectively against air targets, even in ideal conditions. Still, the F-5E can take 4 of them, and if you need to pop some tanks, the AGM-65B can generally deliver. The F-5E's flight performance is simply amazing, with only a couple of caveats. Its maximum speed isn't quite as high as other top-tier jets, but it can still be supersonic at low levels without a big heavy loadout. Its dogfight maneuverability is near the top of the meta, and with good piloting and an upgraded crew, you won't lose too many one-on-one fights. Now, the normal disclaimer applies that if you take this thing out loaded up with a few thousand pounds of deadweight ordnance hanging off the bottom of the plane, your flight performance is going to suffer dramatically in every way. It'll be a noticeable difference. So, if you're intending to go out only for dogfights, leave the rocket pods, Mavericks, and bombs at home. It's worth mentioning that the gun pod the F-5E can take, while amazing, is a big heavy dead weight that'll reduce your dogfighting potential quite a bit. Now, another noteworthy mention, all the footage in this review was captured with an expert crew and a fully upgraded pilot. As you can see, even with upgrades, you can black out pretty easily, and pulling excessive Gs in the F-5E can happen without any effort at all. The plane also has high-speed combat flaps, but you really don't need them. Flying the F-5E into missions gives a lot of flexibility, especially now that top-tier attackers no longer get the air spawn. Some top-end attack jets will still be faster, but if you take an air-to-ground loadout, there might actually be a useful number of targets to hit, which can definitely help with the stock grind on this plane. What's more, the variety of your loadouts gives you a lot of choices to pick, and you can have weapons that suit your playstyle. The only catch is that the plane doesn't have any kind of ballistics computer, so all of the weapons are blind. Now, if you fly out dedicated for air combat, your only choice really is going to be the tip winders, and that's it. Any of the other loadouts are going to just nerf your flight performance too badly, and they're not worth the extra flexibility you get from having the air-to-ground weapons. Flying out for close air support really comes down to a question of if you have enough spawn points to get the Mavericks. If so, you're golden. If not, the other weapons are fine, but aiming unguided weapons without a ballistics computer while trying to evade top-level anti-air is difficult. So if you've got the Mavericks, standoff missile attacks are probably your best bet. Otherwise, try to make high-speed, low-level passes through the battlefield without loitering over it, and make generous use of countermeasures on the way through. Now, visually, the F-5E looks a lot like a regular F-5, which makes sense, but it's a little bigger and has a few minor refinements to its shape. The most obvious example are the leading-edge root extensions, and overall, I think the F-5E looks pretty good. For paint jobs, there are a whole bunch of excellent options that you can get, and at least one of them is probably going to suit your personal tastes. Overall, great visuals for the F-5E. Now, landing this plane really couldn't be much easier. Gear and landing flaps can go out safely at around 450 kilometers an hour, and you've got a drag chute after you touch down. The plane also has an arrestor hook that you'll never get to use, but it's fun to know it's there if someday they add maps with carriers or something into the top-tier rotation. Now, the cockpit on the F-5E is just excellent. You get the B-scope for the radar, it has great visibility, an easy gun sight, and a visible radar warning receiver. You really can't ask for much more than that. Overall, this is a great cockpit. Now, closing out on the F-5E Tiger II. This plane has an absurd number of weapon loadouts to fit every possible playstyle and mission profile. It's got top-end maneuverability, and is competitive in a dogfight with basically every other plane in the game right now. And it carries an adequate number of countermeasures. However, when flying out for air combat, it only gets 2 air-to-air missiles. It has no ballistics computer for any of its air-to-ground weapons, and it's not quite as fast as some of the other top-tier jets, which can matter sometimes. The final verdict on the F-5E really is that this is an amazing top-tier dogfighter, and it shouldn't be overlooked or underestimated in a fight. Its limited load of air-to-air missiles is the only thing holding it back in air combat, and its flexible set of loadouts give it pretty solid air-to-ground potential as well. Not a bad prize for grinding through the F-104s. As always, thanks for watching.